Sergei Ivanov's cafe was on the verge of closing. The trees were piled high, the neighbors chuckled behind his back, but he continued to feed everyone who walked through the door. One night, he gave his last portion of food to a shivering homeless man, ignoring the whispers that his kindness was the cause of all the troubles. But when the police came to close the cafe, black SUVs appeared on the street, and the very man everyone considered worthless stepped out in a suit that made the entire street freeze in silence. Before we continue, please hit the subscribe button. Your support is incredibly important to us and helps us share inspiring stories like this. Now, let's begin. Sergei Ivanov's cafe looked as if time had almost erased it from memory. Above the entrance, a cracked neon sign hummed weakly, struggling with the light rain that had been pouring down on the streets all day. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of fried onions and strong coffee, mixed with a slight dampness that seeped in every time the door opened. The place was nearly empty. The red couches in the booths were worn, a few crumbs from the morning customers, and the quiet hum of the old refrigerator in the basement. Sergei stood behind the counter, slightly hunched over, wiping the same spot with a rag that had long since lost its color. He wasn't trying to keep it clean, he was trying to distract himself, not to think about the pile of unpaid bills in the drawer that he hadn't opened in 2 days. People said he was too kind for his own good, and maybe they were right. Every night, someone would come in hungry. Sometimes an old woman, sometimes empty-eyed children, sometimes men whose shoes were falling apart as they walked. Sergei never refused. He would silently set a plate in front of them, without asking questions. For him, this wasn't charity, this was life. If I can cook, they can eat, he muttered under his breath. That evening, the doorbell rang softly. A thin, wet man walked in. His coat clung to his body like a second skin. His beard was uneven, his eyes were deep set, and his hands shook as if the cold had eaten into his bones. Sergei didn't hesitate. He pointed to the nearest booth. "Sit down, brother, to freeze." The man shuffled forward silently. He smelled of rain and the fatigue that accumulates after nights on concrete sidewalks. Sergei poured him a mug of hot coffee, set out a bowl of chicken soup, and discreetly slipped him a couple of pain pills from the can he kept by the cash register. 2 locals' voices came from a corner booth, loud enough for Sergei to hear. "That's why he's broke," one muttered. "Gives out food to every bum he can get." Another chuckled. "Will they close his place until winter?" Sergei gritted his teeth. He saw their reflection in the chrome of the coffee machine, but he didn't turn around. He wasn't going to make excuses. What was the point? Let them think he was a fool. Instead, he looked at the man in front of him. The stranger was slowly drinking his soup, watching Sergei with unusual concentration, as if studying more than just the food. Every movement, like Sergei putting his rag in his apron, or bending slightly with quiet concern, was met with an attentive gaze. Sergei didn't know that this gaze meant much more than the gossip in the corner. The rain outside the window pounded harder. Sergei rubbed his tired eyes, unaware that this night had become the first line of a new chapter in his life. Morning light poured through the murky windows of the cafe, covered in dust that Sergei didn't have time to wipe off. The tables were almost empty, only a couple of people were always drinking coffee. Their voices sounded louder than they probably thought. "It's too soft," one said, stirring sugar in a cup. "Soft," snorted the other. "That's stupid. You can't give away food when you can't pay your own rent." Quote. They laughed, shaking their heads, as if Sergei were a living example of how not to live. Sergei pretended not to hear the whispers, moving behind the counter with studied calm. He filled salt shakers, adjusted napkin holders, anything to keep his hands busy. His apron was frayed at the edges, and a thin layer of sweat glistened on his forehead despite the morning chill. But the neighbor's words stung more than the stack of expired shields hidden in a drawer in his office. By midday, the stranger was back. The same tattered coat, the same quiet footsteps. Sergei tore himself away from the grill and nodded toward the booth without thinking. The man sank slowly into his seat, as if each movement were an effort. "You again," Sergei said quietly, placing a plate of eggs and toast in front of him. "Eat, no arguments." The stranger's hand shook slightly as he picked up his fork. He said little, but his eyes never left Sergei. They watched him as he wiped down the counter, greeted the occasional customer, and glanced at the old clock above the door as if time were slipping through his fingers. Word spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Sergei's generosity was no longer considered noble. Now it was weakness. Suppliers began refusing to deliver. One truckload of groceries never arrived, and when they rang, the answer was curt: "He'll pay his debt first." That evening, when Sergei went out to throw out the trash, two neighbors leaned against a lamppost. "He's drowning himself," one muttered. "Don't feel sorry for him," the other replied. "He chose this life. You can't feed everyone." Sergei froze, holding a garbage bag. Their words echoed in his head. For a moment he wondered if they were right, but then he remembered the faces of those he fed: tired mothers, hungry children, the silent man inside who ate as if it were his first proper meal in days. Doubt faded like a shadow. Inside the cafe, the lights hummed dimly. Sergei leaned against the counter. Fatigue was imprinted in the wrinkles on his face. He didn't notice, but the stranger's eyes softened, as if they saw something rotten in Sergei's fatigue. The noises from outside grew louder, but Sergei continued to open the cafe every day, and the stranger returned, always silent, always watching. The week dragged on like a rope stretched to its limit. By Tuesday, Sergei was cooking. Of what was left in the pantry, half a sack of rice, a few onions, a box of dented tomatoes bought cheaply from a vendor who had taken pity on him. He stirred the pots with a heavy hand, hiding a lump in his chest every time he thought about the ledger in the drawer. On Thursday morning the mail arrived, a thick envelope with bold red letters. Sergei sat at the counter, running his thumb along the edge of the seal. His heart was pounding. He already knew what it said. When he tore open the envelope, he saw confirmation of his fears: property seizure. "If the debt is not repaid, the cafe will be taken away in a few days." Quote. That evening the cafe was quieter than usual. Only the hum of the refrigerator and the stranger's spoon nodding at the cracked bowl. Sergei sat opposite him for the first time, the weight of the day pressing on his shoulders. The stranger ate slowly, never taking his eyes off Sergei. For a moment, Sergei thought he was about to speak, but nothing came. Only the same flat, impenetrable gaze. The next morning they arrived. Two uniformed officers swung open the door of the cafe, holding papers in their hands. Behind the officers, a man in a suit hung around, clutching a clipboard. His gaze scanned the room like a vulture watching for prey. "Mr. Ivanov?" one of the officers asked. Sergei nodded, his throat as dry as in the desert. In a cold, official tone, they explained to him, "The cafe is being confiscated. He has until the end of the day to vacate the premises." Several customers in the booths watched, their whispers spreading like wildfire. "I told you he couldn't make it," one muttered. "All his free food is his to the channel," another added. Sergei froze, gripping the edge of the counter so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He heard the gossip, felt the eyes burning into his back, but he didn't argue. What can you say? Suddenly, there was a soft whine of tires outside. A line of black SUVs pulled up to the side of the road. Their engines rumbled softly, like a hidden threat. Heads turned, conversations stopped mid-sentence. The officers at the door tensed, unsure of what was happening. The door swung open, and out of the first car stepped the same man who had come to Sergei's cafe night after night. But now he was wearing no shabby raincoat. In its place was a perfectly tailored suit, shining in the rays of the morning sun. His beard was neatly trimmed, his posture was straight, and his presence was commanding. Behind him came aides with thick folders and briefcases. Silence fell in the cafe. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Even the officers froze, speechless. The man stepped forward. Each step was measured. His gaze was fixed on Sergei. Sergei's chest heaved, his breathing shallow as the truth began to form in his head. This man was not who he seemed, and the revelation that was about to happen was greater than Sergei or anyone in the room could have imagined. The cafe seemed frozen in time. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed to fade as the man in the suit stepped fully inside. His polished shoes clicked against the worn floorboards. The sound echoed louder than the squeal in the cramped space. Sergei removed his hands from the counter. His ever-present rag slid quietly to the floor. The man stopped a step away. He looked at Sergei's face for a long moment, then placed a thick folder on the counter. His voice was calm, measured, but carried an authority that silenced the room. "Mr. Ivanov, these are documents. This building, this cafe, is now yours. Paid in full. All debts settled." Sighs swept through the room. The officers shifted awkwardly, suddenly not understanding why they were there. Sergei blinked, trying to comprehend what he had heard. He shook his head slightly, as if refusing to believe it. I don't understand," he forced out. The man straightened up. "You gave me food when I had nothing. Gave it without asking, without judging. Did it again and again, even when they said it would ruin you. I wanted to understand who you really were. Is this who you are or is it just a habit? That's why I dressed like this." He waved his hand slightly, as if pointing to the memory of his shabby appearance. "I tested you, and you exceeded all my expectations." A murmur swept through the cafe. The same neighbors who had recently mocked Sergei now looked at him with wide eyes. Some of their cheeks showed shame. The man continued. His voice was firm but warm. "I'm an investor in restaurant, and I've been watching you for longer than you know. You're not just the owner of the cafe, Sergei, you're its soul. And people like you shouldn't drown. They deserve to rise." The man pulled the folder closer. "This cafe is yours now, completely and debt-free, but I want more, to see it grow. New branches, your vision spreading far and wide. If you let me, I'll support you every step of the way." Sergei's breath caught in his throat. His hands hovered over the papers, shaking slightly. The murmur in the cafe had changed. It was no longer mocking, but full of awe. "Can you believe it?" Someone murmured. He was right after all. The kindness was returning. Sergei's eyes filled with tears, though he tried to hold them back. He reached for the folder, pressing his palm to it, as if making sure this wasn't a dream. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. The sun broke through the cracked neon sign, flooding it with light, and for the first time in a month, Sergei felt its warmth. And even though his life had just changed in ways he could never have imagined, he knew one thing would remain the same. Tomorrow morning, when the cafe doors opened, anyone hungry would find a place at the table, because in the end, that was what saved him. Sergei's kindness almost cost him everything, but it also became the reason for his salvation. Do you think true generosity always comes back? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this story touched you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the video. Your support helps us tell more stories about the power of kindness and honesty.